The sound of splintering would echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot. I was inside, fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, when I heard the crash. By the time I got to the front yard, my 6-foot cedar privacy fence was already halfway torn down. 3 guys in reflective vests were yanking the panels off like they were opening a box of crackers. I froze. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" One of them, a beefy guy with a clipboard and a hat that read, HOA enforcement, barely looked at me. "Per order of the Homeowners Association. Your fence violates the neighborhood's open view ordinance. It's gotta come down." I stepped further onto the lawn, heart pounding. That's my property. That fence has been there for 6 years. No one said a damn thing. You can't just tear it down without telling me. That's when she showed up, Barbara Danvers. Mid-50s. Overprocessed blonde bob. Sunglasses so big they covered half her face. And the permanent snarl of someone who thought the world owed her a parade. She strutted up like she was walking a red carpet, holding a thick binder. "Actually, Mr. Rylan Pierce, we sent you 3 warnings." She flashed a smug little smile. "Certified mail. And a notice was posted on your door last week. You refused to comply." "I never got anything," I said, jaw clenched. "Well," she said, gesturing to the men, "you should check your mail more often. The view from the community garden is being obstructed by your monstrosity. And remember, this neighborhood values aesthetics." I looked behind me at the remains of my fence. My dog, Max, stood just inside the backyard, barking his head off, confused and terrified. That fence wasn't just about privacy, it kept him safe. It kept my daughter safe. And I built it myself, every nail, every board. You can't just send goons to destroy property. This is illegal. Barbara crossed her arms. "It's HOA policy. You signed the agreement when you moved in." I took a breath. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice even. "You listen to me. This fence is entirely on my property line. I checked city zoning before I built it. If you've got a problem with it, you go to court. You don't send some wannabe bailiffs to demolish it." One of the men grunted and tossed another panel into the back of a truck. "I'm calling the city," I said. "And the police. This is property damage." Barbara scoffed. "Go ahead. We're within our rights." I pulled out my phone and walked back into the house. I wasn't bluffing. Within an hour, a city inspector named Martin showed up in a dusty Ford. He was a no-nonsense guy, maybe early 60s, with sun-worn skin and a clipboard of his own. He studied the scene, took photos, walked the property line. I handed him a folder with my original fence permits and zoning approvals. Barbara tried to needle her way into the conversation. "This man is in violation of the neighborhood's open view policy." Martin cut her off. "Ma'am, I'm not here about HOA policies. I'm here to determine if private property has been unlawfully damaged. Mr. Pierce's fence was entirely within his lot lines, and the city granted the permit. That makes this a civil matter, possibly criminal." Barbara's face paled for half a second before she forced a chuckle. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Martin said. "Did you authorize this demolition personally?" "I'm the HOA chairwoman," she replied, voice suddenly defensive. "I acted on behalf of the board. Got documentation proving board approval?" Barbara hesitated. "We reached consensus." "That's not how it works," Martin said. "If you don't have signed minutes from a board vote and proper legal notice to the homeowner, this is vandalism. Trespassing, at best. Criminal mischief, at worst." I watched her blink hard, processing. Martin turned to me. "You want to file a report?" "Oh, I do more than want to," I said. "I'll have my lawyer draft a civil suit too." Barbara finally spun on her heel and marched away, barking orders at the crew. "Stop everything. Now." But the damage was done. Half my fence was gone, my backyard exposed, and my blood boiling. That night, I reviewed my home surveillance footage. I'd installed cameras 2 years ago after a neighbor's car had been keyed. Every second of the fence demolition was recorded, time-stamped, with audio. Exactly what I needed. I sent the clips to my lawyer, Ronan Patel, a guy I met through work who specialized in property disputes. He called me 20 minutes later. "Rylan, this is textbook unlawful destruction. You've got them on tape, you've got your permits, and you've got a city inspector backing you. We're suing the HOA and Barbara Danvers personally. And we're contacting the district attorney." I leaned back in my chair. For the first time that day, I smiled. "I want them to pay for every board they ripped out," I said. "And then some." He laughed. "Oh, they will. Let me do the talking. In the meantime, don't fix anything yet. Let the damage sit. It helps your case." By morning, the neighborhood grapevine had already lit up. People walked their dogs slower in front of my house. I caught whispers. A few neighbors even stopped by to say they were sorry, that they didn't know what Barbara had done. One guy, Carl, from 2 houses down, even offered to help rebuild the fence when the time came. But I had other plans. I wanted the whole HOA board to feel the heat, not just Barbara. Because if they thought tearing down my fence was the end of it, they had no idea what was coming next. 3 days later, I stood in front of a hastily erected plastic barrier that someone, probably Barbara, had stuck in place of my destroyed fence. It flapped in the wind like a cheap tarp at a garage sale. My backyard looked like a construction site, and Max refused to go outside without me.
Ide barely slipped.
My daughter, Emily, asked if we were moving. I told her no, but I wasn't sure how long that would stay true. Up until that week, I never wanted to be that guy. The one who fought with the HOA, went to every meeting, or looked up municipal codes for fun. But when someone rolls over your rights like a bulldozer, you don't just get up, you build armor. At 9 in the morning sharp, Ronan met me at the county courthouse. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a thin briefcase. He had the kind of calm expression that said, "I already know how this ends." We walked through security, past the glass doors, and up to the civil clerk's window. "Names?" the woman behind the counter asked without looking up. "Ronan Patel, counsel for Rylan Pierce," he replied. "We're filing a civil complaint and seeking an emergency injunction." Her eyes flicked up at that. Ronan slid the folder across the counter. Inside were the security camera stills, the permit copies, and a notarized statement from Martin, the city inspector. By noon, the paperwork was filed and stamped. The wheels had started turning. That afternoon, Ronan called me with a surprise. They sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA's legal counsel. Guess what? Turns out the board never approved the demolition. Barbara acted alone. I leaned back in my chair. "You're serious?" "Completely." Their own attorneys said they were blindsided. And here's the kicker, 2 of the board members are willing to testify. The next day, I got a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man in a black windbreaker with a badge on his belt and a notepad in his hand. "Detective Alan Monroe, Property Crimes Division," he said. "You filed a report for unlawful destruction?" I stepped aside, and he walked in. I led him to the dining table where everything was laid out: pictures, permits, footage. He reviewed the material in quiet concentration. "Has anyone from the HOA contacted you since the incident?" he asked. "Not directly. Just a few neighbors saying things felt tense at the last board meeting." He jotted something down. "I'll be honest," he said. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore. If she ordered that teardown without board consent and stepped onto your property without a warrant or court order, that's criminal trespass. Add in the damage, and we're looking at felony vandalism, especially if the cost is over a threshold." "It is," I said. "The fence alone was over $9,000. That doesn't count the security upgrades I need now." "Got receipts?"
"Ido."
He nodded. "We'll be pursuing charges." The next morning, Emily's school bus hadn't even rounded the corner when a white SUV pulled up in front of my house. Out stepped Richard Calloway, the HOA treasurer. Tall, mild-mannered, and less of a bulldog than Barbara. He walked up the driveway with his hands raised like he was approaching a bear. "I just want to talk," he said. I folded my arms. "Then talk." I didn't know what she was planning. None of us did. She told us it was already approved, that we'd signed off on it last quarter. But when I checked the minutes, there was nothing. She forged it. "You have proof?" He pulled a folder from his messenger bag. "These are the actual meeting minutes. And this," he flipped to a page with highlights, "is the version she sent to the HOA lawyer. Completely rewritten." I took the folder. It was damning. The language was different, the formatting off. And the signatures, even mine from a prior vote on landscaping, had been copied and pasted. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want her out. I never signed up for this kind of liability."
She's put the whole board at risk.
"If you press charges, I'll testify." I nodded. "We're past that point. Charges are already in motion." He looked relieved, like someone had finally taken the weight off his back. As he turned to leave, I stopped him. "One more thing."
Why now?
Why the sudden urgency to tear down the fence? He hesitated. "There's a development proposal. She's been talking to a realtor about converting the community garden into a boutique housing strip. But your fence blocks part of the sight line from the model property. She needed it gone for the sale pitch." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. So this wasn't about aesthetics.
No.
It was about money. With that, he got in his SUV and drove off. The same afternoon, Barbara was served on her porch. A county sheriff handed her 2 envelopes, one for the criminal charges, the other a summons for the civil suit. She tried to slam the door, but the cameras across the street caught the whole scene. Within hours, the footage was circulating in the neighborhood group chat. I didn't post it, but someone did. Probably one of the board members sick of being dragged down with her. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was packed. People who hadn't shown up in years were suddenly interested. I stood at the back, arms crossed, while Barbara sat at the front like nothing was different, still wearing her oversized sunglasses indoors. But the atmosphere had changed. "I call this meeting to order," she announced. "No, you don't," said a voice from the left. It was Lisa Tran, the secretary. She stood holding a printed copy of the HOA charter. "As acting secretary, I move for an emergency vote to remove Barbara Danvers as chairwoman, effective immediately, due to criminal misconduct and misrepresentation." The room erupted in murmurs. Barbara stood, indignant. "You don't have the authority." "Yes, we do," Lisa interrupted. "Per Section 4 of the Charter, any officer under criminal investigation for actions taken in the name of the HOA can be suspended pending resolution. I demand a formal hearing." "You're getting one," Richard said. "Right here. Right now." The vote wasn't even close. 37-4. And those 4 looked like they regretted it before their hands hit the air. Barbara stormed out without another word. 2 days later, a locksmith changed the code on the clubhouse. Her access was revoked. The realtor deal collapsed. No one wanted to touch a project tied to a criminal case. And the community garden stayed exactly where it was. With the injunction granted, the HOA was ordered to fund the reconstruction of my fence in full, using a contractor of my choosing. They also paid for additional surveillance cameras, upgraded lighting, and a 1-year subscription to a legal monitoring service for my property rights. Barbara's court date was set for late summer. Detective Monroe told me she'd likely face multiple charges, falsifying records, criminal mischief, and trespassing among them. The DA had already met with Ronan. As for me, I started going to every HOA meeting. Not because I wanted to, but because someone had to. I didn't run for office. But I didn't have to. The board was different now. Transparent. Nervous, maybe, but honest. One evening, Carl stopped by with a 6-pack and a question. "You ever think about running for chair?" I shook my head. I just wanted a fence, man. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I wanted peace. And peace, sometimes, had to be built like a fence plank by plank, nailed down with law, patience, and a refusal to back down. A week after Barbara was ousted, I got a call from Detective Monroe. He asked if I could come down to the station to review something. His tone didn't carry urgency, but it wasn't casual either. I left work early and drove to the precinct, where he met me in the lobby and led me down a hallway that smelled faintly of floor wax and old coffee. He opened a door to a small room with a long table and a screen mounted on the wall. Two other people were already seated, one in a dark brown blazer with a notepad, the other in jeans and a windbreaker with a city emblem stitched into the sleeve. Monroe introduced them as an assistant district attorney and an investigator from the zoning fraud division. "We've uncovered more than we expected," Monroe said as he powered on the screen. "This isn't just about your fence anymore." The screen lit up with a spreadsheet: names, lot numbers, dates, and signatures. The ADA tapped the screen with a capped pen. Barbara submitted over a dozen falsified compliance violations in the last year alone. Many of them were used to collect fines or force property modifications. We believe she forged multiple board approvals. The zoning investigator leaned forward. "We also found irregularities in filings for the community garden expansion. It looks like she submitted a variance request using a falsified survey map. The changes would have shifted the property line of the HOA's common land right into the rear corners of 3 separate homes." I blinked, trying to process it. "So, she was redrawing the map?" "Essentially, yes," the investigator said. "And using those maps to position homes as non-compliant. Once declared out of compliance, she'd pressure owners to donate parts of their land to the HOA in lieu of legal action. It's extortion through zoning manipulation." The ADA flipped a page on her notepad. "We're preparing a list of affected homeowners. Once we've confirmed which properties were targeted, we'll be issuing restitution orders and possibly expanding the charges." I sat back. She always acted like she owned the neighborhood. Turns out she tried to. Monroe nodded. "And she left a paper trail. Sloppy work, altered PDFs, reused signatures, inconsistent timestamps. She did most of it from her personal laptop on unsecured Wi-Fi. Her router name was Queenbee HOA. I couldn't help but I laughed. Of course it was. The ADA leaned forward. "You'll likely be asked to testify, not just about the fence, but about patterns of behavior. We're building a broader case." I told them they'd have my full cooperation. By the time I left the station, the clouds were low and heavy, like the sky was waiting for something to break. I drove straight to the hardware store and picked up motion-activated floodlights for the backyard. I wasn't paranoid, I just no longer trusted comfort zones. Not after seeing how deep the manipulation ran. That evening, I knocked on my neighbor Claudia's door. She was in her 60s, a retired librarian with an immaculate garden and a calico cat that always glared at me like I owed it rent. "I heard about the zoning fraud," she said before I could even get a word in. "Someone slid a copy of the meeting transcript under my door. Did Barbara ever approach you about your property?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Last fall. Said my tool shed extended into HOA land. Told me I could either pay a fine or sign a waiver that gave them use rights to the back 5 feet of my yard." I didn't know what to believe. "Did you sign?" "I did," she said. "I was afraid they'd sue me." I exhaled. They were bluffing. And now the city's involved. Her eyes flared wide. "Do you think I can get my land back?" "You will. They're issuing restitution." She invited me in for tea, and over mismatched china cups, she pulled out a folder with every notice and letter she'd received. Barbara's name was on nearly all of them. I took photos and sent them to Monroe. By the weekend, Ronan had filed an amendment to the civil suit, adding misrepresentation and financial coercion to the list of claims. Our case was no longer just about offense, it had become the first domino in a cascade of HOA abuses. On Monday, I attended a special session at City Hall. The planning committee had invited homeowners from our development to speak about their experiences. Half the chairs were full when I arrived. By the time the session started, people were standing along the walls. One by one, residents spoke not just about forged signatures, but about unexplained fines, threats of foreclosure over minor landscaping issues, even mysteriously denied requests for solar panels. A retired Marine named Greg stood up and revealed that Barbara had told him to keep his yard military tidy or face a penalty for visual disorder. His voice cracked when he said it. The head of the committee, a woman with thick glasses and a tired expression, promised a full audit of all disciplinary actions filed by the HOA in the last 3 years. As I left City Hall, someone caught up with me in the parking lot. It was Lisa Tran, former secretary, now interim chair. She looked relieved and exhausted.
I didn't know how bad it was, she said.
I thought she was strict, but I never imagined she was rewriting maps. She was trying to consolidate control, I said. 1 yard at a time. Lisa pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket. This has the HOA's financials from the last fiscal year. I compared them with bank statements. Over $20,000 is missing.
I stared at the flash drive.
Did you tell the board? Not yet. I want to tell you first. You started this. You need to see it through. I took the drive. We'll bring it to the DA. That night, I sat at my desk reviewing the files. The missing funds were disguised as landscape upgrades and legal consultations. But there were no receipts, no contractor records, no lawyer names. Just blank lines and check stubs made out to a consulting firm called Danvers and Lake. A quick online search revealed the firm didn't exist. The address led to a UPS mailbox rental 2 towns over. I emailed the evidence to Ronan and Detective Monroe. Within the hour, I got a call from the DA's office. They were issuing a subpoena for bank records and preparing an embezzlement charge. 2 days later, Barbara was arrested in the lobby of a luxury day spa. Her mugshot made the local news. The reporter called it a rare case of suburban corruption unraveling from a single privacy fence. I didn't love the headline, but I appreciated the irony. After the arrest, the board held a town hall meeting in the community center gym. Lisa stood at the microphone and read a public apology on behalf of the board. She promised transparency, restitution, and full cooperation with the city's investigation. When she finished, she introduced a proposal to dissolve the HOA entirely. The room went quiet. Someone asked if that was even possible.
It is, she said.
With a supermajority vote. 66%. We've spoken to a municipal attorney. If residents agree, we can disband the HOA and return governance to city code and local ordinances. I raised my hand. What happens to the community assets? They'll be turned over to a neighborhood trust run by volunteers. No mandatory dues. No enforcement power. We maintain public spaces through grants and donations. No one gets to rewrite maps or threaten lawsuits over fence colors. A man in the back asked how fast the vote could happen.
Tonight, she said.
If we have the numbers.
They did.
The vote passed with 72%. Just like that, the HOA was slated for dissolution. The next week, I rebuilt my fence not just as a barrier, but as a statement. Max watched me from the porch, tail wagging. Emily painted a sign that said, "Private property respected," and nailed it to one of the beams. I didn't tell her to, it was her idea. One morning, a moving truck pulled up in front of Barbara's house. She wasn't there to supervise. The house had been seized as part of the asset freeze pending trial. A new family moved in a few weeks later, a nurse, her wife, and their twin boys who liked soccer and ran through sprinklers barefoot. On a quiet Sunday, Carl came over with a toolbox and a grin. "You know," he said, "you could run for city council. You've already got half the neighborhood behind you." I shook my head. "I think I've had enough politics for one lifetime." He pointed to the rebuilt fence. "Funny how one piece of wood can bring down an empire."
Not just wood, I said.
Evidence. Witnesses. Truth. He raised his coffee cup. To fences that hold, and people who don't fold. We clinked mugs. Behind us, the neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, the kind that lets you breathe again. By early spring, the sting of winter had faded, but the fallout from Barbara's downfall was still unfolding. Her arraignment was scheduled for mid-May, yet the legal gears had already begun grinding through every inch of her tenure. I kept my distance from the courthouse drama, trusting Ronan and the DA's office to handle it, but that didn't mean I was idle. The neighborhood was shifting subtly, but undeniably. For the first time in years, people were talking over fences instead of through complaints. Claudia started a weekend book exchange table on her lawn. Greg, the retired Marine, helped a young couple fix a broken garage door without being asked. Something had cracked open after Barbara's arrest, and it let in more than just accountability. It let in air. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. 2 weeks before Barbara's court date, Ronan called me from a restricted number, a habit he picked up after someone from the old HOA board tried to leave a voicemail pretending to be a city official. "I need you to come into my office today," he said. "We have a situation. It's serious." I left work early again. When I arrived, Ronan was already mid-conversation with a tall man in a navy blue suit with silver-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as Aiden Holloway, a federal investigator from the Housing and Urban Development Office's Regional Fraud Division. Ronan shut the door behind me. "We've uncovered something Barbara was hiding, and it's bigger than zoning fraud." Aiden opened a folder and laid out a single-page and internal HOA payment ledger. It listed a series of vendor disbursements from the HOA Emergency Fund over the last 2 years. "See these?" Aiden pointed to a cluster of entries labeled Community Security Services, a name I hadn't heard before. "That doesn't exist," I said. "Exactly," Aiden replied. "We ran the EIN listed with those payments. It links to a shell account registered to a holding company based in Nevada. Guess who's the sole beneficiary?" "Barbara," I said. "Not just her," Ronan added. "Her cousin, a disbarred contractor named Vincent R. Danvers. He was arrested 6 years ago for operating under false licenses in 2 states. Aiden laid down another sheet. "This is a subcontractor agreement Barbara pushed through without board approval. It authorized her cousin's company to perform discretionary property inspections, which were essentially staged visits where they'd photograph random yards, draft fake violation reports, and bill the HOA for corrective action that never happened." I leaned forward, scanning the page. So the fake fines weren't just about control. They were padding invoices. And guess where those funds came from? Ronan said.
Umeone duas.
Every fine paid by residents was funneled into the scheme. We estimate over $70,000 across 18 months. I sat back. "This is criminal racketeering." Aiden nodded. "And wire fraud. And falsification of public records. We've already looped in the state attorney general." Ronan handed me a new document. "This is a request for testimony. They want you on the stand when the case goes to federal court. You were the first documented victim, and your footage is the keystone." I took the paper. My name looked strange printed across the top. Strange, but right. A week later, I was deposed by the state's legal team in a glass-walled room that overlooked the city courthouse. Aiden was there, along with 2 prosecutors and a court stenographer who typed with terrifying speed. They walked me through the events again, this time focused not on the fence, but on the financial trail that followed it. I answered everything. I described the demolition crew, the forged approvals, the threats Barbara made, and the way the neighborhood had been tricked into silence. I gave them the names of anyone who'd been approached about donating land or paying arbitrary fines. When the deposition ended, the lead prosecutor thanked me and said I had done something few people ever managed. "You didn't just expose a fraud," she said. "You broke a system that depended on people staying quiet. The trial began the second week of May. I sat in the gallery, just behind the prosecution's table. Barbara arrived with her attorney, a man who looked like he wore expensive suits more often than he won cases. Her expression was hollow, less righteous fury, more a numb, mechanical stillness. She didn't look at the crowd.
Didn't look at me.
The prosecution opened with the footage of my fence being torn down. There was no preamble, no narration, just raw, unedited truth. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional sound of wood cracking on metal as the panels hit the truck bed. Then came the ledgers, the bank transfers, the shell companies. Witness after witness took the stand. Lisa, Claudia, Richard, homeowners who had paid fines for violations that never existed. The prosecutor read back forged letters and emails with timestamps that directly contradicted Barbara's testimony. I testified on day 3. I told the court how I had built the fence myself, how it had kept my family safe, how I received no warnings, no hearings, just destruction. Barbara's defense tried to paint me as hostile, said I had a vendetta, but they couldn't refute the footage, couldn't explain the missing money, couldn't justify the forged documents. When I stepped down, I didn't sit in the gallery. I walked out into the sun and didn't return until the verdict. On the 10th day, the jury delivered the decision, guilty on 8 counts, including wire fraud, racketeering, falsifying public records, and criminal mischief. Barbara didn't flinch. She just nodded once, as if she had expected it the whole time. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal custody, with restitution ordered for every homeowner defrauded under her leadership. Vincent Danvers was arrested the same day in Nevada, charged with conspiracy. His indictment included a recorded phone call where he bragged about playing HOA kingmaker from 2 states away. With the HOA officially dissolved, the neighborhood transitioned governance to a civic advisory group. I declined to join. I had no interest in sitting through more meetings or drafting bylaws. But I did attend the first community rebuilding event, a potluck held under the old oak tree at the center of the block, the one Barbara once tried to have trimmed because its shadow created mood imbalance. Greg grilled ribs. Claudia handed out bookmarks with garden quotes. Max snoozed at my feet, leashless, finally at peace in a backyard that belonged to us again. 2 families who had once fought over landscaping now chatted about building a joint greenhouse. Emily taught the twins next door how to paint wooden signs like the one she'd hung on our fence. The air felt different, lighter, maybe, like something heavy had been lifted off the neighborhood shoulders. As the sun dipped behind the houses, Carl wandered over holding a plate of brownies. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't had those cameras?" he asked. I nodded. Every day. He looked around at the crowd. "You realize you changed how this place works, right? You didn't just fix your yard. You fixed the street." "I didn't do it alone," I said.
No.
"But you were the first one to say no loud enough for everyone else to hear it." We watched the kids race down the sidewalk, trailing chalk dust behind them like contrails. "You rebuilding anything else?" Carl asked. I glanced at the new planter I'd attached to the south side of the fence. "Thinking of putting in a grapevine. Something with roots." He grinned. "Long as it doesn't block the view." I laughed. "Good thing no one owns the view anymore." We stood there in silence as dusk settled. No bylaws. No citations. Just neighbors and open sky.